Welcome back. And so let's get to that very important conversation about the pump price of petrol against the backdrop of the war between U.S., Israel and Iran, especially following Iran's resolve to block the Strait of Hormuz and President Trump's response, that huge threat from the President of the United States of America, where he said, block that strait, face death, fire and fury. Of course, the implications are clear. That means that the war may not be ending anytime soon, especially because of the contradicting statements that we're hearing. And so how much of that will impact on the pump price of petrol from this time until, when there is a definite resolve of the international community, to come to the negotiation table? Let's have this conversation now. And joining us is Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel, economist and oil and gas expert. He joins us from our Abuja studio. We also have Mr. Billy Gillis-Harry, president of Petren. Okay, Mr. Harris is also joining us from our Abuja studio. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you so much for having us, sir.
Good morning, Bukola. Thank you for having me.
I'm starting with you, Mr. Emmanuel, and I'm, pretty much spoiled for choice here. Jeffrey and I began the conversation moments ago. On the one hand, the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to be managed between Iran and Oman because it runs between both countries. So I wonder what influence Oman has in this conversation. That's on the one hand. But more importantly, talk to us about the measure of crude oil that Dangote sources from the international community as against the measure that it buys from home, and how much impact that has on the pump price of petrol.
Bukola, thank you so much for having me. Good morning to you, Bukola and Geoff in Lagos. Always a privilege to be here. So the facts on the ground are the Straits of Hormuz, like you know, is a small aperture that links between Iran, southern Iran and northern, actually UAE on one side and Oman on the other side. And it has a throughput of anywhere between 20 and 22 million barrels of crude, which is about a fifth of global daily consumption. And you have crude coming from Kuwait, from Bahrain, from Saudi, from Iraq, from Iran itself, from the UAE, that goes through the Straits of Hormuz. And about 80% of the crude that goes from Iran through that aperture actually goes to Southeast Asia, mostly China. China is the major buyer of Iranian crude, despite the fact that Iran has been under sanction. And GCPOA plus P5+1 in 2015 failed after Trump became president because, U.S. lawmakers, especially Republicans, said that one of the conditions on which that GCPOA was signed was that about $1.7 billion that was in the U.S. Defense Military Fund was going to be returned in cash to Iran. And if you go back in time, you notice that in the 70s, I think 70s, the Shah of Iran, Pahlavi, had sent $400 million to the U.S. to buy military artillery. When he was overthrown and Ayatollah Khamenei, later Ayatollah Khamenei became the premier of Iran, and Iran was declared an Islamic state, despite the fact that it was a secular state. That money was seized by the U.S. government and it was placed in a defense military fund that was interest-bearing. And it accumulated $1.3 billion in interest. So, they were concerned that the return of that money to Iran was going to provide cash they needed to build uranium into a nuclear bomb through nuclear fission. So Oman doesn't really have leverage because Iran has basically, through the Quds Forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, built a naval command. They've built kamikaze drones, very sophisticated unmanned aerial vehicles. They funded militias, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other militias that you see around Africa over time. And, one of the jokers that Iran has in this now is these UAVs that can be launched from anywhere in the Middle East and not necessarily originate from Iran. And now the latest one, because the market buys on rumor and sells on the news, the latest one is that Iran is threatening that they're going to deploy naval mines that gets triggered when it actually recognizes the metal of a ship, or the ship touches the mine, or it recognizes a change in water pressure because a ship is incoming, and the market is basically reacting to that rumor that is going to happen. And the fact also that yesterday the U.S. Energy Secretary had tweeted that, a U.S. naval vessel escorted a commercial ship carrying crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and immediately deleted that tweet. And the U.S. government denied that this happened, has created confusion in the market because the market buys on rumor and they sells on the news. And then on the issue of the impact on Dangote Refinery and how much crude that he actually sources, where he sources it from. He sources crude from Brazil, sources crude from the US, sources some crude, very minimal volume. I think he sources less than 1 million barrels around West Africa, Senegal, and the likes of them. Dangote actually sources less than 50% of his crude in Nigeria. I'm aware that for the month of March, NNPC has 6 cargoes benchmarked to US dollar of about 5.7 million barrels for the month of March, because an average cargo, an LCC, is about 950,000 barrels, that is going to the refinery. But he needs about 18 million barrels on a monthly basis, so an average of about 600,000 barrels a day. So, and the cost of freight, because of this war, the premium it has added for vessels, hull and machinery, insurance, P&I, protection and indemnity, war risk insurance, the cost of freight for a typical Panamax vessel taking crude of about 1 million barrels across the the Atlantic, from Northern Atlantic, from maybe Brazil or the US to Lagos, it's gone from about $37,000, $40,000 a day to about $80,000 a day. So it means that if you're sailing for about 20 days, which is the time it averagely takes across the Atlantic, it's going to cost you between 80,000 times 20 days, that's about $1.6 million. That's minus what you have to pay to NIMASA and NPA as levies, So these are the premiums. Then you also have the fact that the crude that is sources in Nigeria, API above 30 degrees, lower viscosity, he has to pay an extra premium on it because the operators don't sell the crude directly, which is a contravention to sections 109 of the PIA. They go through third-party traders and they add commissions. On a typical, and this is a conversation we've had severally, I've mentioned this severally, on Bonga crude. Bonga is, the field I started producing in 2006, does more than 200,000 barrels. It's paying as high as $6.20 per barrel as an extra third-party premium that is not taxed by the Nigerian government, So these are the issues that, the government wants to begin to look at and say that, look, you're supplying Dangote crude. Are you supplying him in Naira? Are you supplying him at a discount to market? No. If you're supplying him in Naira, the cargoes you're supplying him in Naira, which is about maybe 30% of what he needs to refine daily, right, is benchmarked at the current exchange rates. And he's paying an additional premium on that crude. And he has to include that in his cracking margins and refiner's premium. So these are the issues that we have to begin to talk about as we address the risk of an increase in price. Price anywhere around $88 a barrel. Arab Black and Russian Urals are trading at a $12 premium to Brent, dated Brent. So we have to begin to talk about these issues, which we've gone on and on for about 2 years, as we begin to address the risk of an increase in price due to the escalation. In fact, freight rates in the Middle East right now is about $500,000 per day to rent a vessel. So he's not even taking crude from the typical, one of the sources of his crude has been Basra. Basra has 3 major fields in Rumaila, in West Kano, and in Manu. They produce about 2.8 million barrels. And the undersea pipeline that takes crude from Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea in Egypt, about 5 million barrels, and then from Iraq to the Red Sea, about 1.8 million barrels. They have throughput of only 6.8 million barrels. The Middle East typically does anywhere around 20 million barrels a day. So, if he's not able to source crude in Iraq and he has to source crude from all these other markets in the world, the freight rates has gone up. It affects his margins. The crude that he buys in Nigeria is paying at the benchmark. The ones he's buying from the commercial operators is paying in US dollars, and he's paying an extra premium that he normally doesn't pay when he sources for crude internationally. So we have to begin to interrogate all these specifics and dynamics and how it has impacted on the fact that petrol prices as at last night is 71 cents per litre, which is still very low compared to the fact that in the UK, a litre of petrol is currently trading at $1.82. In the US, it's trading at $1.35 a litre.
All right. Those are critical questions that we must ask, especially if we, do the calculation and see what $1, plus, translates into naira against the backdrop of what Nigerians are buying, petrol for. But let's come to Mr. Billy Gillis-Harry, who is a major player in the market. And reports say that, Dangote may have captured well more than 50% of the domestic petrol market. Talk to us about the pricing, both from Dangote and, what it should vary based on what other marketers are sourcing if they're still importing.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I will say first, let us be grateful to God and also to Alhaji Aliko Dangote for taking the investment in foresight to reality by establishing the Dangote Refinery. I don't know what we'll be doing today in Nigeria if we did not have that facility operating. So the question you've asked is very direct. What is our where do we source our product from? What is our concern about price? Right now, we source all of our products from Dangote. Whether we are going to buy it through the depots, which have not started selling to us in our various depots, which we're expecting that with effective stakeholder collaboration, that the Dangote's refinery's objective will be met. Yeah, if Dangote has to have 100% of the domestic retail outlets, it's only for the benefit of Nigeria. So I don't see what is the difficulty there. While we were talking about this a couple of months ago, we indeed had to have other sources to be able to ensure that we have petroleum products in our retail outlets. But today, that is not the case, and especially with the war raging in the Mid-Eastern part of the world, that imports completely may not even happen, until there is some kind of, resolve in this matter. So we are taking our products from Dangote, and whether it's 50% or 100%, for every retailer, our concern will be just to meet our objective to supply products, refined products to end users, ensure that our services grow the economy on a daily basis by providing those services that are very critical. And that's where we are. As for pricing, we are very much aware that the vagaries of the situation of the market will determine that, and we have always said that the prices will never be static. It will be up, to be down, to be down, to be up, and that is what we should be expecting, today and even in the coming days. Hopefully, the example of what Dangote has done yesterday to reduce his price by 100 naira, well, I don't have any empirical reason why, or economic reason why he did that, but I believe that there must be some very fundamental changes in the dynamics of production for him to have made that deduction, and we're happy about that. Hopefully that will reflect in the pumps as soon as we start buying this product from him and lifting. As of today, we have tankers that need to be serviced, at the depot, and we are hoping that we should be able to start to get products to our retail outlets.
Yeah, Mr. Kevin, let me come to you, and I'm going to ask, the way maybe a layman would want to ask. Now, according to what we've seen and reported, and even Mr. Gillis-Harry has mentioned the fact that this is not the first time Aliko Dangote, the Dangote Refinery, has said they are reducing price out of patriotism and all of that. For me, and maybe a lot of Nigerians, what has to, because volatility is constant, depending on what is playing out where. For now, it's the Middle East, because a fifth of the world's oil movement is being disrupted because of that conflict in Iran. You cannot predict the future. The best thing you can do is to have a scenario planning. And I want to believe that the Nigerian people who are blessed with this oil are now blessed with an investment that refines this oil, maybe more coming on stream, will be able to have some form of relief in terms of security, in terms of energy security. Now, he's done his own part, according to him, to lower price. You've talked about a breach of the PIA in terms of the third-party selling of the crude. What can the government do at times like this? So I don't know whether using the word drastic would be appropriate, but some measure of reduction of or incentivizing production so that consumption is a bit cheaper for the ordinary Nigerian person who buys diesel and PMS at fuel station.
Incentivizing is the right word.
That's from Mr. Emmanuel, Mr. Gillis.
Focus. Yes, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I said incentivizing is the right word because that's what we...
Mr. Gillis, if you can hear me, the question is actually for Kelvin. Kelvin, did you hear the question?
Oh, okay.
Geoff, thank you very much. I heard the question. So it's important for us to realize that the government of Nigeria is not providing any special incentive. In fact, there was no scenario planning for a crisis. You know, just permit me, back in time when Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is now DG of WTO, and Dr. Olusegun Adanga had formed the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund, NSI. I remember meetings 2010, 2011. They structured it around three major pillars: Future Generation Fund, Infrastructure Fund, and Stability Fund. For times like this, there's a reason why countries have sovereign wealth funds, right? They have sovereign wealth funds because in times like this, it provides buffer, okay? When the petrol subsidy was removed in 2023, which was a good move, by the way, because the government was close to bankruptcy and the president something had to give. The idea was to create fair market pricing, you know, and remove under recovery, which was riddled by a lot of corruption. The government was losing about maybe 5 trillion naira to waste on a yearly basis, bridging funds that could not be accounted for, inflation of daily consumption volumes. Bridging fund did not meet up with actual daily consumption volumes. They had what they call the domestic crude intervention stock that was equivalent to the total installed capacity of the government-owned refineries, 445,000 barrels per day. And when the PIA was signed in August 2021, Sections 109 said that they will provide like a domestic crude supply obligation to refiners ahead of the beginning of a refinery, which is a Dangote refinery, to like guarantee supply to Nigerian refiners, right? That was the idea. But today, Dangote is buying at market prices to Platts and is paying an extra premium, okay? Number two, the 312,000 barrels the government was using as crude oil swap for petrol subsidy. After subsidy was removed, that 312,000 barrels was supposed to come back to the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Nigerian government. Between 2023 and today, the Nigerian government has not come out to tell Nigerians where that 312,000 barrels of crude oil goes to daily. Because I can tell you, Geoff, that 312,000 barrels that form the domestic crude intervention stock does not go to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So in times like this, for example, where your NSIA is not liquid enough to provide a buffer for Nigerians, right? That 312,000 barrels, the National Economic Council can sit down and say, okay, times are tough. We have the BVN and NIM of the most vulnerable, the most vulnerable Nigeria. Let's pick 40 million out of 220 million, even if we've not had population census in 20 years. We have their BVN, we have their NIN. Can we credit them directly? Because we have their data as government. Can we credit them directly monthly or weekly to enable them to cushion the impact of petrol prices? This is not you providing a subsidy through a market structure. This is you providing a subsidy as a direct cash transfer to the 40 million most vulnerable Nigerians to cushion the impact of the rise in petrol prices. And that crude intervention stock, that 312,000 barrels the government, you know, was using for crude oil swap as subsidy for under recovery, that is no longer in existence. This is the use for it. So the question I have for the president and his economic team this morning is, where is the 312,000 barrels of crude that was used as subsidy that is not necessarily going to the consolidated revenue fund? Why are you not using that to alleviate or ameliorate the suffering of Nigerians at this time? Because Dangote is a private business. He's not going to assume the role of government and provide subsidy for Nigerians. He has shareholders who invested. He has dollar debts. He has to pay down his debt. He has to make a profit. It's not a social enterprise. It's a business. If the price of crude oil changes in the international market, look, the price of calculating PMS is very simple. It's the price per metric ton benchmark to Platts, because it's buying crude oil in dollars, right? Multiplied by Nigeria's exchange rates, divided by the number of liters in 1 metric ton of petrol, depending on the density of the petrol, right? So if you cannot control the price of crude oil, then you can manage your exchange rate. And Geoff, we were witness here when a few weeks ago, the vice president was speaking at an event and he said that the government is concerned about allowing the naira to appreciate significantly because it might affect real rates for FPI investors who are in Nigeria. It might affect receipts to FAC because customs has to adjust its exchange rate. It might affect net export proceeds from people who export. Why are you concerned about naira appreciating when in situations like this, for example, your exchange rate is a significant denominator in calculating the price of PMS, which will accelerate inflation? Why are you concerned about? Why are you not allowing the naira to float? The naira appreciated to about 1,340 naira, and the government is coming out to tell you that it's concerned about the naira appreciating. The Nigerian government cannot control the price of crude oil. Even the US government cannot, on its own, unilaterally control the price of crude oil. What leverage do you have? You have the leverage of your exchange rates. So if you're saying you're not allowing the exchange rate to float freely and find its forward curve because you're concerned about FAC receipts, right? Then we have a problem, Geoff. So these are the questions that the government needs to answer. Unfortunately, the government does not plan because it doesn't do, in times of abundance, the government sits down and it makes merry. It doesn't realize that there will be lean days. It's not done any scenario planning for a crisis. This stress test that we've had from this war, which is unprecedented and unplanned, it's like the final validation we need to realize that the Dangote refinery is the miracle, and it came at the right time, because if there was no Dangote refinery, we will be all glued to TV and watching for the next vessel that will arrive in Nigeria with petrol to guarantee our supply of petroleum products.
Mr. Emmanuel,
for petrol all over the country.
Mr. Emmanuel, I wonder if I can ask you this question, but I'll take the risk. How can we compel government to answer these questions, these critical questions that you have raised? Because amid all of this, the increasing pump price of petrol, Mr. President, who is supposed to be the substantive Minister of Petroleum, is silent. The Minister of State for Petroleum is silent. The relevant heads of agencies, when you can talk about the NMDPRA, the NUPRC, nobody is talking to Nigerians. So how can we secure accountability? And if you asked, if you could talk to the labor leaders as well, the NLC, the TUC, well, there's a fatigue as far as that is concerned. There's even a trust deficit between Nigerians and the labor leaders.
Bukola, your guess is as good as mine. Like, the Nigerians need to ask their government questions, ask their elected representatives at National Assembly questions. National Assembly is supposed to be the arm that holds the executive to ransom and interrogate them on these issues. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing the pressure from National Assembly on the executive arm of government. Why are they not answering the questions on the domestic crude intervention stock that was used as crude oil swap? 312,000 barrels. I've said this over and over again over the last 18 months. 312,000 barrels of crude oil. Where does it go to? Where in the consolidated revenue fund is that money? Why is the government not able to fund this project? Why are you not able to provide a temporary direct transfer of cash as subsidy to the 40 million most vulnerable Nigerians? Why is Dangote buying crude oil in dollars or benchmark to dollars and having to pay a $3 to $6 premium additionally? And with all the charges that comes with bringing crude oil from Niger Delta to the refinery in Lagos? These are the questions that the government needs to answer. Why is the government not, setting up like a gazette that will provide guidelines for operators on willing buyer, willing seller, so that they will not inflate the cost of third-party premiums? Why are the traders, why are the international traders that buy crude from Nigerian commercial operators not paying taxes on that crude that they trade to the Nigerian government? Your guess is as good as mine. They are watching the interview. Why are they not telling Nigerians the truth or answering their questions?
Mr. Gillis Harry, I'd like you to respond to the same question, especially because when you warned recently about the potential increase in the pump price of petrol amid this war, you called on the NNPCL GMD to strengthen refining capacity. But we all know the state of the refineries, the local refineries. So it's important that you also weigh in on this particular concern.
Well, for us, what is needing to be done is rise up to the occasion. We're in a season of stress, and these challenges by themselves should be reason for our innovativeness and our passionate patriotism of Nigeria to rise up. So whether you are a legislator, you are in the executive arm, or you are a business leader such as NNPC, you need to rise up. For instance, if we had at least the 2 refineries in Port Harcourt working, it would have helped what Dangote Refinery is doing today. We gave all the credits to NNPC at the time, and then only to be turned around to be told that, oh, they're operating, but they cannot, it's not commercially viable. Now that cliche should not even be heard at all by Nigerians, after we have spent so much money to fix all of these refineries. So we have made that call, and we believe that both the government and NNPC saw it, and they're hearing it, and they know that that is what the market, the last, the most critical last mile of the industry, is looking at. Because we want to be sure that our retail outlets are wet, and the only way that can be done is that we have refined products. And that's why we're very grateful to the Dangote dream, that today we can have this refinery operating and guaranteeing at least availability of product. For affordability, we'll be talking about that as the days go on, looking out for how government itself should intervene. And in our opinion, the first step to do is to start a massive emergency process to gasify our energy source. We had a very, very, very good gas master plan that we didn't follow. We had right now we have the PCNG that is working, and we should have that now working more collaboratively. For instance, petrol stations are willing to provide our forecourts, for the establishment of daughter stations, and ensure that we can be able to use that as alternative energy. That would have reduced the pressure on the use of petrol, and that would also be what should account for our sustainability. And we don't need to import gas. We have gas that we're flaring, so the government should take a very strong step to turn that flared gas into assets that can be able to. And we've been talking about this probably for decades. Yes, we are seeing it, but we need to start working on it. So that's why we think that in this season, this is a season of innovation, season of thinking out of the box and doing exactly what can be done to ameliorate the situation. The war is raging. Yesterday we were expecting that there'll be diplomatic efforts to be able to assuage it. Today we had a different thing, different body language, and so we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And our predictions are always correct because we're aware that there has to be a replacement cost for Dangote's operations, and those replacement costs will only come from sales. They're going to come by miracles or by magic. So we understand the pricing template that is put in. The other thing we ask is let these changes also be communicated to us in a way that we can be able to accommodate it. Because once the changes come, if they are high, then we as retail outlets will start looking for funds to go and make those purchases. But if we have some kind of communication that makes us to understand this is going to happen, it will help us ahead of time to serve Nigerians better. But by and large, we are very grateful that we have Aliko Dangote in Nigeria and has the courage to make that risk.
Bukola, and I was going to mention to you, Bukola. Okay. Bukola, I was going to mention to you.
You have 60 seconds for that, Mr. Emmanuel.
Other sensible countries in the world that, drills crude and then refines petroleum products, they have a domestic crude intervention stock. Saudi Arabia has it. The U.S. has a strategic petroleum reserve. They hold about 700 million barrels of crude at every given time, right? I've always said in the last 6 or 7 months that Nigeria needs a domestic crude intervention stock of about 1 million barrels per day that is delinked from OPEC quota. And this today, the situation in the Middle East today, is a validation of that argument. We need domestic crude intervention stock dedicated to domestic refiners for such situations as this, guaranteed supply. Because when you have a situation where your major refiner is having to import crude and is subject to international prices, is subject to freight costs that has doubled for the routes that you mostly import from South America and North America, is definitely going to translate that cost to the Nigerian market because the government is not providing him with any incentive or subsidy anywhere.
All right. There's so many other levels to touch. For instance, what are we missing, as a result of continuing crude oil theft? And there are reports that crude oil theft have been reduced from 100,000 barrels per day to about 9,600 barrels per day. Why have we still not reached 2.2 million, that was achieved under former President Goodluck Jonathan? And so should we have been gaining more as a result? And should there be, other balances that could have been reinvested to dedicated domestic crude, as you have talked about? But we must anchor at this point and hope for another time where we can explore all the other areas to this conversation. Mr. Billy Gillis-Harry is the President, Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria. And Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel is an economist and an oil and gas expert. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the Morning Brief.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for having me.
We'll take a moment now. When we return, it will be time to talk national security. Stay with us. We'll be right back.